everybody, Lisa here. Welcome back to Tarot Memoirs. So this is the weekly series where I'm going through the tarot card by card, at least in the majors. The minors, we're going to start clumping them together, but in the majors, card by card, and I share some bits and pieces from my favorite tarot books. I show you some card images so that we can compare and look at some different versions of that particular card, and then I share some life stories or some personal tidbits and the ways that I think that this card shows up for me in my life. So as always, please remember to click the like button if you like this video. That's the little thumbs up you do. It really helps my videos on YouTube, which is great. If you have comments or feedback, I always welcome your thoughts down below. And don't forget to subscribe if you're not already. So with that said, I'm going to jump right into it. Actually, I always say that and then I don't always do it. But I have to tell you, when I was getting ready to film the cards in sort of like this section of the major arcana, when we're talking about like death and the tower and the devil, I was like, red lips. I need red lips. Is anybody else like, okay, I know not everybody wears lipstick, but of those of you who wear lipstick, do you ever find that when you're going head to head with something a little bit more challenging that you like, that's when you go for your bold colors or your reds? Just curious. Is it just me? I don't think so. Anyways, I have a bunch of juicy bits on death in this book that I want to share, but as always, the books that I'm going to pull information from are Rachel Pollack's 78 Degrees of Wisdom. This thing is fantastic. I've had my copy for forever, it feels like. This is a worthwhile book to have in your library. She also has a new book as well that I think is called 78... It's got a blue cover. I'm the worst. But there's a new version too that people have been raving about. And I believe that Zach at the Tiger's Bookshelf has been doing a book study and live chats and videos and stuff about that newer version. So that's a really good book as well. But I always pull excerpts from here. I pull excerpts as well from Bennabelle Wen's Holistic Tarot. Oof, also a favorite. And Melissa Sanova's Kitchen Table Tarot, which my copy is getting like pretty beat up because it sees a lot of love. This is my go-to for quick, snappy bits about the different cards. So love this book. And I love the different voice. So each of these three books have very different takes. So Melissa Sanova is very much a like get down to business kind of talk in her book. Very like jargon? What was I going to say? Very, like, straightforward, I guess. Literally as if you were sitting at her kitchen table talking about tarot. That's, like, kind of the whole voice of this book. So this is great for that. Rachel Pollack's book, I think, gets deeper into sort of the mystical or esoteric symbolism, some of the deeper stuff. And in Bennabelle Wen's book, Holistic Tarot, she approaches the tarot as well with a very psychological, holistic, current day sort of approach. So very, very different voices here, which is great, and I love that, and the comparison to me has been very helpful as I've been studying these cards for this series. So this time, we are talking about this charming fellow here, Death. So if ever there was a card that in media and with people who've never had exposure to tarot, I was going to say terror, is that not the hilarious, like most hilarious word slip ever? This is the card that people get freaked out about. And anybody who knows tarot cards that are coming up later in this series are the ones we get freaked out about. But I think it's also important that we don't necessarily take death lightly in the tarot. I think we're sometimes a little quick to dismiss it as transformation or as like change. And those things are true and they're a big part of it. But there's a very particular type of change that death talks about. And I'm going to share my favorite bits from the books that really talk about that. But I think it's important that we remember that it's still a often difficult, sometimes frequently even painful experience. Sometimes it's like a great, expansive, new era in our lives, but a lot of times this is not a comfortable place to be hanging out. So I think it's important that as much as we appreciate that it's transformation and change and new opportunities as well, that there's still a grieving process for a lot of us in what we're letting go of and what we're releasing, right? So anyways, don't get me on my soapbox. Apparently that's where I'm headed. So we're gonna get into some highlighted bits here. So in Rachel Pollack's 78 Degrees of Wisdom, some bits that stood out to me. Where's my little card dude? Here we go. All right. Death strikes everyone, kings and commoners alike. This basic democracy of death was a favorite theme of medieval sermons. I think it's a really important point that we are all mortal, we will all die, And that levels the playing field in a big way, I think. And I think it's important to remember that that's a part of the archetype of this card, is that nobody gets to escape this. This is happening to every single one of us. Individual forms are always dying while others come into existence. Without death to clear away the old, nothing new could find a place in the world. And I like that thought too. So just so you know, when I'm reading bits here, I'm only reading little chunks. Like, I'm not reading all the way through a section. So just the bits that stood out to me as really cool or interesting, worthy of sharing, because there's a lot of text in these books. But I really liked that idea that death is necessary. And in fact, in nature, we see that death and the cycle of life and the predator-prey cycle, and even things like wildfires in forests when they're naturally occurring, lightning storms and things like that, they help to burn away all the dead undergrowth and create space for new life. And that's a natural and necessary part of nature's survival and ability to thrive. So important to remember that this is still an important part of our lives, right? Contrary to what many people believe, the card of death does not actually refer to transformation. And I loved this line. I was like, yes, that's so refreshing to see a different perspective. Rather, it shows us the precise moment at which we give up the old masks and allow the transformation to take place. This book, I mean, that is such a powerful way to look at this card. Perhaps we can understand this better if we consider the tarot's parallel in psychotherapy. By force of will, aka strength, the person with the help of the therapist/guide, aka the hermit, allows knowledge to emerge of who he or she really is and what habits or fears he or she wishes to shed, aka the wheel and justice. The knowledge brings calm and a desire to change, the hanged man. But then a fear sets in. If I give up my behavior, the person thinks, maybe there will be nothing left. I will die. We live under the ego's control for so many years, we come to believe that nothing else exists. The mask is all we know. Often people will stay stuck in therapy for years because they fear release. The nothingness of the fool terrifies them. The fact is, they are right. The I created out of these lifelong behaviors will indeed die. That person will cease to exist, but something else will emerge. How powerful is that to understand that when we consciously release the stuff that no longer serves us, there is a death. There's the death of the old us. And I think that's an important part of this whole archetype. We fear the death of our old selves because we don't know what to expect afterwards. What we are, or what we were rather, is the devil that we know, which I'll talk about a little bit when I get into my tarot memoirs. In divinatory readings, death signifies a time of change. Often it indicates a fear of change. In its most positive aspect, it shows a clearing away of old habits and rigidness to allow a new life to emerge. In its most negative aspect, it indicates a crippling fear of physical death. This fear goes deeper than many people realize, and often a reading with many positive indications will end badly because of death in the position of fears. The trump reversed indicates being stuck in old habits. Weight talks of inertia, sleep, lethargy in life. This sense of a sluggish, boring life masks the sometimes desperate battle of the ego to avoid change. We inherently, I think, fear change. We inherently fear having to give up that which is comfortable, even that which doesn't serve us. And so I think that was a really powerful way to look at this particular card. And so I really liked that bit in there. In Benabelle's book, she takes, I think, a slightly different take, but let me remind myself here with my bits that I have highlighted. Okay, so she says, I'm not going to try to hold this up because my arm is going to get so sore, so if you see me really looking down, it's because it's in my lap right now. So, Benabelle says, the card depicts the end of a phase or a stage in the seeker's life and the beginning of a new one. The death card is about change. It assuages the tendency in human nature to resist change. And then further down she says, generally the death card indicates personal calamity in the seeker's life that is beyond his or her control. The death card is reminiscent of the darker aspects of Key 10, the Wheel of Fortune. This is also a card about feeling afflicted over and resistant to change. Hair in my mouth. Okay. Reversed, the seeker feels stuck or inert. There's a strong sense of inertia. So again, we have that idea of stagnation or of inertia. The seeker feels like nothing has been accomplished. There's disappointment due to the inability to let go and move on. Plateau. So some similar themes there, not terribly, terribly different, but you get the idea. We're still talking about this idea of needing to let go of the old to move forward into the new. And finally, we have Melissa Sanova's book here. And her action phrase for death is, I am weary. This is really interesting. And I don't know what deck, I'm sure she says somewhere what deck this particular death card is from. But that may play into it a little bit here. So let's see. So here again, death means change. And there's a difference. Transformation and death and change are both similar words. And transformation is definitely what we're talking about here. But the process of transformation isn't always happy, lucky, awesome feeling, right? So she says, every bloody time, oh my gosh, she's hilarious. Every bloody time I see a TV show or a movie that has a killer leaving the death card at a crime scene, I just want to come up out of my seat. For heaven's sake, do your research, writers. Your murderer leaving this card implies that he's going to stop killing and straighten up and fly right. How anticlimactic. I thought that was hilarious because it's kind of true. The death card does signify the opportunity to let go of the old you and embrace the new you. So, like, not as calamitous as media would like us to believe, that's for sure. And then I've also highlighted here, one of the best things about death is he is tired. And this was kind of an interesting perspective, death himself being tired. I guess that makes sense. That'd be kind of a crummy job, hey? He is coming slowly and steadily, and if you're paying attention, you can walk along beside him instead of being trampled underfoot. I thought that was a really powerful statement, and it reminds me of, I can't remember which tarot deck it is. I've seen this somewhere, but there's a quote. It might be in my Art of Life tarot, which I keep at work, which has fine art and then quotes, and it says, live, and it's a quote. It's like death is whispering in somebody's ear and saying, live, because I'm coming. And it also reminds me of the statement, memento mori, which is similar. It means like live, because like live life to the fullest, because we're all going to die. I really like the idea of living life to the fullest and embracing the inevitability of death so that you can experience your life right now, so you can appreciate it and be grateful for it right now. Inverted, you have to have death to have rebirth. If this is inverted, it's stagnancy. So I will say it's kind of interesting that all of the authors in all three perspectives completely agree that the shadow side of death is clinginess, or is plateauing, is not growing, is not moving into that new phase of life. I think that's really cool and powerful. So let's look at cards, because that is probably one of my favorite parts. I say that every time, but yes. So we've been looking at the Rider-Waite version of death here with our mounted rider who is coming over to, it looks like there's like a pope or a bishop of some kind, somebody that looks like he's higher up in status, and then just some common people. Again, that whole idea that nobody is immune to death. We have here in the Marseille of this card a more gleeful approach to death, I think. I think he's like standing on somebody's head down here, like just happily swinging his scythe. Like this is his job, he's just doing it. There's like body parts everywhere. This is kind of grim, actually, to be honest. I'm kind of new to Marseille, so I haven't really examined these images closely yet, but yeah, coming. I love the beauty and the softness and the care in this death card from the Mary L. This is a difficult image for some people because it brings death a little bit more real, a little bit closer. We're not looking at a ghost rider. We're potentially looking at a lost loved one here. And this one's just beautiful. Death from the Gill Tarot. Almost similar to Marseille here, I would say. I do enjoy, I've mentioned this to my sister recently, I really enjoy when death is faceless. Yeah, I don't know why. Just because to me it's a force rather than a figure. Death in the Naked Heart Tarot. We have the white rose, we have the skeletal hand here, the butterfly, which symbolizes, of course, that evolution or that transformation. We have another happy little death dude in my little mini fairy tarot. This is a little bitty deck, but it's a great image. We have the Everyday Witch Tarot's death card. I like this idea here that there's a passage. It feels like you're being shepherded somewhere, and then there's a open door here in the back with a bit of a glow. And the death figure here is wearing a mask, which I like. Next we have the Bonefire Tarot. Lots of symbolism. Again, we see the white rose. Often in death, we'll see the two towers with the sun rising in the back. You'll see that here actually in the Rider-Waite. Also back in the corner, you see the two towers with the sun rising. And this actually says something. Oh, it's in other languages, I think, so that's no help. I can't help you there. We have a raven. Powerful. I do like that image. We have the Anna K. This death dude is a little bit bad horror movie. Maybe it's a little Twilight to me. I don't know. Not a fan. This is not one of my favorite. Although I do like that he's kind of holding out his hand to bring you forth. So there's that guiding imagery here. I kind of do like that, I have to say. But him himself, he's kind of a weird looking figure. I don't know. In the Arcana Tarot, this is the Arcana Black. This is a playing card pip deck, but the majors are fully illustrated. Very similar to Rider-Waite here. Just a slightly different perspective. My Mom's Tarot. Even in my Mom's Tarot, my death guy has a mask. There's the white rose. Still get the sun rising from between two mountains in the back. This Pagan Otherworlds, this is very Marseille to me. He's, again, very gleefully and actively swinging his scythe, just like indiscriminate, it feels like. And his wings are made of arrows, which is really freaking cool, actually. This is a new deck to my collection as well recently. And finally, the Moonchild. And I do adore this image. Partly because I think this figure has made peace, this freedom and this open-hearted expression on her body just feels to me to be very, I feel release in this card, which is exactly the word that, oh no, she used weary, I think, in Kitchen Table Tarot, but regardless, I feel release here. I feel release of the old. We have this skull over here. We have the Luna Moth. Yeah, this is beautiful. It's probably one of my favorite death cards, because all I think when I look at this is dancing with death, is like embracing it, which I really appreciate. So those are some card images, so you have an idea of how different decks have sort of tackled this topic. For my own personal life, to me, the part that stands out to me about this card is the idea of allowing the old to pass so that you can embrace and step into the new. And so that's how this card is, or the archetype of this card shows up for me in sort of my day-to-day life. It's like that moment of acceptance and allowing a new world paradigm to actually exist without pushing against it or resisting it. And when I do that well, I'm embracing the positive aspects of the death card. Yeah, the other thing I think that I made a note about on this one was that I get really hung up on expectations. Like I sort of mentally think about how something might play out, and then when it doesn't play out that way, I sometimes have a hard time letting go of that expectation or that visual in my mind of what I thought it was going to look like, whatever it might be. Excuse me. And that actually prevents me from fully embracing the experience I am having. And I'm so hung up on what I thought it was going to look like that everything else just kind of pales and I'm not really present. So when I do let go of that expectation, when I do go, well, it didn't go that way, and I step into the experience, that's when I'm in the light side of the death card. At least that's how I interpret it. For the shadow side, when I'm fighting change, when I'm holding on to the things that I know I need to let go of in order to move forward on my personal growth path, when I'm clinging because it's the devil I know, because sometimes that familiar stuff is hard to release. It's hard to put down. And I see this come up when it's time to make a big move, like when it's time to change jobs, or even when I'm in a really toxic environment. Sometimes it's difficult to go, okay, I know it's toxic, I need to step away from it, but it can be difficult to really walk away from the known and step into the unknown. And so where shadowy sides of death come in is when I stagnate, exactly like what these authors were talking about, where I let myself plateau in my personal growth because I'm so afraid to step away from the comfortable. Probably the biggest time when I think that I really let an old me die and stepped into a new me, one of the biggest times that that is true for me is when I stepped away from a culture of body shame, of the diet and weight loss industry. And I will probably be talking about this more on my channel in coming years. I mean, I don't know how this is all going to play out yet, but I do talk about it quite a bit in my work as a yoga teacher and as a body image advocate and as a body image and self-worth coach. But I made a very conscious decision about probably 13 years ago now to stop dieting, to stop trying to lose weight, to accept myself as I am. And I did things like I threw away a scale. We don't have a scale anywhere in our home, and we haven't for more than a decade. I consciously chose to never ever again diet or try to consciously lose weight. And my body will do what my body will do. And that is a very controversial and scary shift to make, because we are surrounded in our culture by messages that we should constantly be trying to achieve a particular beauty ideal, which in North America and at the time of filming this video is still very much a thin ideal. We're starting to see some shift and some movement into a body positive place, but we're not there yet. Even in tarot, we don't see body diversity truly represented in 9% of decks, just like we don't see racial diversity as much as we really should be. But that's a whole other tangent. What I will say is that choosing consciously to step away from hating my body, which was something I had done my entire life, was not an easy change to make, and it did come with a certain amount of personal resistance. It was like there was shame with that, there was external pressure with that, there was a whole lot of stuff with that. But when I finally stepped away, when I made that change and let that old me, the one that was constantly dieting, the one that was constantly trying to fit into this beauty ideal, when I let all of that officially go, like when I was really, really done, I am not that person anymore. And there is so much about me that has changed for the better since doing that. Not only in the physical sense, like I have a healthier relationship with my body, I have a healthier relationship with food, I don't binge, I don't restrict, I listen to my body, I eat when I'm hungry, I stop when I feel like. There's a whole bunch of like practical things that happened as a result, but there's a whole lot of intangible things as well that happened. Just being at peace with my body, not spending energy on that, on trying to achieve some ridiculous ideal, has given me more of my life back. And I really am a completely different person, to the point where sometimes I feel a real dissonance with the world around me because that diet culture is still everywhere. When I hang out with people who are outside of my little body positive personal bubble of community, I'm suddenly surprised and jarred because that's not the world I really choose to inhabit anymore. And so sometimes I get really taken aback and pulled in a really weird way when I suddenly find myself surrounded by people who are still in that body hating or self-loathing kind of culture. And I'm not saying that everybody who diets like hates themselves or anything like that, but that was definitely the culture that I was in, was one of being at war with my body. And when I stepped away from that, my world was blown wide open. So that was probably my biggest personal death. There have been others for sure, but that was the one that was very conscious and where I really had to almost mourn that old lifestyle. And let me tell you, there are still times I miss it. There are still times that I miss that control, that habit of managing my diet, or of, I don't know how to describe it, but it was the known. It was the devil I knew. And I know we're not talking about the devil, but that was the thing. That was my world, and that was who I was. So I did have to, in a certain way, go through a process to let that truly go. So that was my big death moment to share. I'm really interested to hear how you are engaging with this series, if you have thought about how death has shown up in your life. And I know that death as an archetype, we talk about sort of, at least in this series I specifically have been talking about the intangible ways that death shows up. But that is not to say, this is my fluffy card that I'm going to show. That is not to say that cards like this don't come up and mean actual death. And I think we as a tarot community need to remember that sometimes that's exactly how this shows up. And that has happened to me as a reader before. It is not something that I know how to completely address because it's not a comfortable thing to have happen. It's not, there's a responsibility I feel as a reader to address these things in a responsible way and to choose wisely what words I share. So sometimes that's what I think it means. And does that mean I'm right? No, it doesn't. And I think the best way to approach that, at least for me in my practice, has been to talk about things like memento mori, to live every life to the fullest, because you never know how long we're going to be here. I think it's foolish to think that death couldn't mean death. I do think that that sometimes is the case. But 99.99999% of the time, this card definitely is talking about metaphorical death. And I think that's important to remember. But definitely I want to also treat that card with respect because it is a big idea. It is a big concept. So I hope you're following along with me with this in some way. You're welcome to share your thoughts in the comments down below. You're welcome to share any questions you have about what I've shared here. I'm definitely happy to open up a dialogue about stuff like that. And in addition, if you are following along with the journal prompts I've been sharing, I'm about to share some of those. As always, each week I share a few journal prompts from Andy Matzner's book, Journaling the Tarot, A Little Book of Big Questions. So here are the ones I chose for this week out of that book. Number 1, what chapter is currently closing in your life? How are you making peace with that transition? Number 2, how are you changing as a person? Number 3, what are you refusing to acknowledge? Why? Number 4, what do you need to embrace? And number 5, what belief about yourself no longer serves you, and with what can you replace it? So thank you so much for joining me in this series. I really, really enjoyed doing it. So I really enjoy that you guys are watching it and hopefully getting some value out of it. It has taught me so much about how I relate to these cards on a very, very personal level. And I hope that you're able to, even if all you do is just think about how these cards might show up for you in your life, I think that's a really valuable exercise. So until next week, I will see y'all later. Bye.